Hi, friends. This is a continuation of the memoirs of a German soldier who fought on the Eastern Front in the vicinity of Stalingrad. He talks about the heavy fighting, the harsh weather, the retreat of the German army, and the huge losses. Enjoy watching it. After the commander voiced his concerns to us, we felt firsthand the effects of the Russian heavy weapons that the leadership had warned us about. At 6 o'clock, the battalion, which numbered 160 men, received orders to move out. Our company had very few veteran soldiers and only one experienced commander, but that was soon to change. We had gone about 200 meters when we suddenly found ourselves under attack from the right. We moved our heavy weapons to the left flank, preparing them for battle, and tried our best to camouflage them. We were misled into thinking that there was a Russian camp there, but it was only a ruse, a false camp, and we fell for it. There was no one there. We had to turn the whole flank to aim our heavy weapons at the enemy. Stalin's artillerymen and heavily armed infantrymen were firing at us from hiding places in the woods on the very other side. Fortunately, we were able to react quickly and in a highly competent change of tactics. We returned fire and unleashed all our might on them. The battle was won, we accomplished our task and knocked the enemy out of his positions, capturing the heights. It was just a narrow, only 300 meters, strip of land, but on it there were many military objects that were now ours, including 8 machine guns, 3 mortars, a large number of rifles. 38 men were taken prisoner. The rest of the enemy soldiers fled to the other side of the river. During the battle, the commander of our battalion was nowhere to be seen, but when we had almost captured the height, he suddenly appeared. I was next to him when he proudly reported to his superior commander that the task was accomplished. He radioed how many weapons he had captured, how many prisoners, that the defeated and pursued enemy had rushed to escape. The senior commander asked about our losses, but he did not answer as he had not yet been informed about it. We learned that our company's losses were very high. Out of the 60 soldiers available, we lost 43 men. The company commander, Oberleutnant Raum, was also killed. Although we had accomplished the task, our position was precarious. We had only 17 men left to defend the occupied territory, but we knew that we needed at least 60 soldiers to do so, and it was clear even to a dead man that we could be knocked out of here. In that battle, I received my 3rd wound, but I did not want to go on wounded leave again and decided to stay with the unit. At 11 o'clock, the battalion commander met with me for the 2nd time. He came into my tent and began to ask me about the situation. I told him what was going on, that we would use any means, anything we could find here, near our positions, to strengthen our defenses before a possible counterattack. The commander assured me that reinforcements would be arriving in an hour. He promised that as soon as the reinforcements arrived, I and my 16 soldiers would be able to leave our positions immediately. Somehow his words didn't seem very convincing to me. I reported that it was not safe here, and that if reinforcements did not arrive by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I would withdraw all my men. By 3 o'clock, the reinforcements had not arrived. I sent one of my comrades to a concealed position to watch the enemy, so that he would give us a red rocket alarm if the enemy started to advance on us. At 3:15, I signaled for my comrade to abandon his post. We could not wait any longer for reinforcements. It was time to abandon the positions we had paid so dearly to capture. We waded tiredly back to the village through which we had passed during the night. I was told that a column of troops had been tried to send us, but that it had turned around and withdrawn to its original positions, running into the enemy who had captured the wounded. We were only 100 meters from the town when suddenly we saw a rocket signal. It meant that the Russians were moving out to capture the settlement. The column of wounded had been captured by the Russians and was in their hands. I had to find a new escape route. I got a compass and a map and led my soldiers around the town to the regiment's CP. When we got there, it was already 12 o'clock at night. I reported my arrival to the regiment commander and informed him of the situation, but it seemed to me that he was already aware of what was happening. The commander asked me about the strength of our company. I reported 16 people. Then the regimental commander asked my name, and I proudly told it to him. I found the house where my companions were staying and lay down to rest. We quietly awaited further instructions. It was January 27, 1943. We spent some time in the town. I took the opportunity to see a doctor to have a wound received during the battle treated. It was a wound in my back from a grenade fragment, and I began to feel a slight pain in that area. The medics gave me a tetanus shot. Since the wound was not severe, I declared myself ready for service. After a while, the pain in my back began to recede and no longer caused me discomfort. After the doctor, I went back to the company and found the battalion commander waiting for me there. On the way, I observed the lively movement of troops, especially units with anti-tank weapons. The battalion commander put us on notice that at 5 o'clock we were to attack again, supported by the troops that had come up. Later, 5 assault guns would join the attack. Behind the town rose the same great height. Its capture again became our task, and our battalion prepared for the attack. The battle began at exactly 5 o'clock. We heard the clanking of the tracks of the assault guns. Explosions of shells lay on the enemy positions. The shelling continued for half an hour, after which the enemy abandoned the heights. We moved forward to take up positions there again. This time the Russians left us very little, only 3 machine guns and a few rifles. Casualties on our side were negligible. Except for a few minor breakdowns of our assault guns, everything went according to plan. When our units took the height, the whole front went quiet. An Oberleutnant from the 8th Company took command of the troops on the height. The motorized infantry and assault guns returned to the town. I stayed with the remnants of my company and climbed up to the observation post. Once there, I looked down and saw 3 of our dead comrades lying in front of it, stripped naked and stripped to the ground. A little time passed, and the silence was broken by a faint but alarming sound. Every 5 minutes, my comrades who had taken up positions came to me and reported hearing the sounds of chainsaws and falling trees. We concluded that the Russians were cutting down trees in order to build a bridge across the Seversky Donets and ferry their tanks across. We reported this to the battalion commander. He immediately rushed to the observation post. He also heard this sound, but could not come to any conclusion. The commander told us again and again that we must hold and defend our position. Then he returned to his CP. The commander's last words were a command to let him know if anything unusual happened. At 5 a.m. we saw silhouettes of Russian vehicles in the distance. We explained this movement by the fact that these vehicles were collecting the wounded and killed from the battlefield. By 5:30, the activity of the Russians had reached its peak. Here suddenly something unusual happened. One of the Russian vehicles appeared about 150 meters away from us. It was equipped with a loudspeaker, a voice from which called, "Comrades, come out. We will give you rest. We will give you food." It was clear that they were trying to lure us out of our stronghold with promises of such handouts. We responded with a hail of bullets. The car hurried to cover, but in a few minutes returned, and again we heard appeals from the loudspeaker. Again we bombarded them with volleys from our guns. We exchanged machine gun bursts, but it was soon over and the Russians retreated. After that we again heard the sounds of chainsaws working, which were louder this time. The Russian tanks were next in line. Our position was very precarious as we were short of men. We waited for the enemy to attack, but the Russian infantry did not move forward immediately, obviously waiting for support from the tanks. Someone noticed that we hadn't seen our commander for a long time. Everyone wondered aloud if the Russians had captured him during the firefight. At the CP returned Oberleutnant from the 8th Company, who reported that during the last firefight, the battalion commander was shot in the head. He was killed on the spot. We continued to wait, and the sounds of chainsaws were getting closer and closer. Soon the turrets of 2 Russian tanks grew in front of our sights. I reported to the battalion that there were 2 Russian tanks moving towards the CP, which were now about 300 meters away from us. The commander ordered me to hold on and remarked that he could not see any tanks. I called him again and reported that there were now 10 tanks involved in the attack. Finally, he too was able to see the first 2 tanks just 200 meters from the CP. The battalion commander was aware that our position was weak. He gave the command to withdraw and escape if possible. Everyone in the battalion realized that we could not withstand such an attack, and finally the commander ordered everyone to withdraw to Voroshilovgrad. There we had to restore our front line. We received replenishment from Voroshilovgrad, equipped ourselves with positions north of the airfield, where we held out safely until February 5. On the morning of February 5, the Russians suddenly came at us and opened fire on us. They soon broke our resistance and put us to flight, and then took over our positions. We had some anti-tank weapons that provided defense for the airfield, but all of them were frozen and ineffective. We safely left our positions on the airfield and asked for help from the SS regiment stationed nearby to help us retake the airfield from the Russians. We began to act in conjunction with the SS motorized infantry, which was scattered across the battlefield. We easily recaptured the airfield back. The Russians had only owned it for about 5 hours. Then we quickly rushed to clear the airfield area. I led the unit to a small house by the airfield. We kicked down the door and ran inside. There we saw 4 Russian soldiers running from the first floor to the basement. We rushed after them and disarmed them without incident. Then we examined the next room and found 3 of our German Luftwaffe comrades there. 2 of them, a private and an infantryman, were tied to chairs, and the third, a field fleet, was lying face down on the floor. He was barely alive. I looked first to where 2 of our soldiers were tied up. Their hair was gray. I had never seen combat soldiers with gray hair before. The 2 soldiers were in a state of shock. We untied them from their chairs and tried to talk to them, but they could not say a word. It was only after about an hour that they began to come to their senses and told us what had happened to them. After the Russians attacked the airfield, the 3 soldiers were captured by the enemy. The 4 Russian soldiers we captured in that building were ordered to guard them. 2 were immediately tied to chairs. A field fibble managed to free himself, and he tried to free the other 2, but he himself was captured. One of the Russians found a piston somewhere, with which he hit the field fibble on the head, and he fell down. A platoon of SS soldiers who followed us into that building took away 4 Russian soldiers and 3 former Luftwaffe prisoners. A doctor assigned to the SS unit examined the wounded Luftwaffe field officer and determined that he would not recover from his wounds. The other 2 began to speak more clearly and told us of their bitter experiences. They were immediately taken to the hospital. The dead field officer was taken to the German military cemetery in Voroshilovgrad, where he was laid to rest. A few days later, the Russians came back to take revenge. They hit us without stopping. They threw their air force at us, which dropped so many bombs on Voroshilovgrad that the city was barely recognizable. The German troops had to retreat from the Voroshilovgrad area as they had done before from the Caucasus region. We feared that we would finally lose the city. We withdrew to positions near Voroshilovgrad. On Saturday, February 11, we were told that when we saw red rockets in the sky, it would be a signal that we should return and give battle to the enemy. Early in the morning at 3 o'clock on February 12, we saw that signal. We left our positions, formed up on the road, and marched back towards the city. By this time, we were completely disorganized. There were groups of soldiers from different divisions, and no one knew exactly what our task was. As we approached the city, we were surprised to find that the Russians had not thrown troops here to defend it, and then we went inside. We arrived at the assembly point in the center of the city where we were given the command to assemble into units by our divisions. At the assembly point, I said hello to 2 of my comrades, but someone immediately handed me orders to follow to my former division. Our new destination was Kremenchuk, and to get there we had to travel a long way of 160 kilometers. Unfortunately for us, the railroad connection was cut off, and we had to find the fastest way to get to our duty station ourselves. We concluded that the only real way was to go there on foot. On February 14, we left Voroshilovgrad and traveled through Gorlovka, Stalino, Mariupol, Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk, and finally reached Kremenchuk. The road in the harsh winter days was hard. The division stood in Kremenchuk waiting for replenishment to compensate for losses in the battles. Recent battles were hard for it. Twice parts of the division were trapped, getting into an encirclement, but each time we managed to escape safely. The second time the division withdrew to the area of Kremenchuk, where it was waiting for the arrival of replenishment. On April 2, having received fresh replenishment, the division reported about readiness for deployment. On April 5, we received orders to move on Slavianok. Soon after arriving there, our commanders sent us 20 kilometers to the east to a town near the Seversky Donets River. We replaced the division standing there and took over the defense of the town. Our forces included mainly reconnaissance and assault units. The defense of the town lasted until May 12, after which we were replaced by another regiment, and we were withdrawn back 9 kilometers without incident. The new deployment site was calm, perhaps even too calm for our commanders. So at 4 a.m. they sent us on another march, this time 10 kilometers east to the front line. Upon arrival, we were moved back and forth along the front line. It was explained to us that the purpose of such movements was to mislead the enemy, to convince him that we had more forces than we actually had. In reality, as it seemed to me, the same regiment was just being driven aimlessly to march here and there. On May 18, it was time again for my 3-week vacation. I went home to visit my mother. I was looking forward to seeing her again. It was good to be away from the front lines and not think about her for a while. I arrived home on May 22, glad to be home, but deep down I couldn't find a place for myself. I could not stop thinking that this vacation would soon be over, that I would be sent to the war again. We often listened to the news together. In new broadcast, it was reported that the Russians were threatening us at the front along the Seversky Donets River. On June 13, my vacation came to an end. For some reason, I had the feeling that it was the last one. It was time to return to the goddamned territory of Russia.